So how's everybody doing? So I'm just going to keep watching. Again, if you don't have your video on and you would like to have an opportunity to chat, just raise your hand and then I'll promote you to be a panelist, and then we can chat. So I hope everyone's doing well. I gotta say for myself, I've been a bit of an emotional roller coaster. So just to be honest, like I'm just finding it hard to process what's happening in the world right now. So I've just been really looking forward to just like submersing myself in glazes and ceramics, because I just find, yeah, it's easy to get lost in something that that you really enjoy and are interested in, and then kind of shout out the rest of the world. So I hope you're all doing okay and surviving, and yeah, and I'm so glad to have you here. So just reading the chat, I just wanted to say that I took your advice and bought the materials needed to start making glazes, and it cost me a bit under $100 US. I'm waiting on a few other supplies to arrive via delivery before I can get started. I'm so excited. Thanks for sharing your expertise and advice. So that was from Melanie. So yeah, you're welcome, Melanie, and I'm so excited for you to get started as well. All right, so for those of you who have your videos on, does anyone want to start by asking a question? No pressure, and you can wave at me, or you can just start talking, and otherwise I can go through some more of the pre-submitted questions and just to like get the conversation going. But I'll just open it up to all of you. Susan?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
And just for everybody out there, I am practically Sue's neighbor. We're only about 80 kilometers apart on Vancouver Island. So we're practically best friends. It's great. So I have done, earlier on when Sue started doing these, I participated in, sometimes it was only Sue and me, and then sometimes there was, 2 or 3 other people. So having a big group is kind of fun. I have been trying to use slip, and is this a legitimate question, Sue, about slip?
Yes.
So
yes.
I generally use Plainsman M370, which is, Sue could probably explain it better. It's not porcelain, it's a porcelaineous stoneware. Is that correct? Yeah. And it's really nice. It's really smooth and slippery and this and that. So I save my scraps and I whip it up, and all I do is put in water and make it kind of a nice thick gloopy mess. And then I have been adding a bit of mason stain and coloring small batches, and then using that in decoration. And I kind of like it, although it is a bit unpredictable color-wise. Once it's fired, it never seems to end up the color I think it should. So I wonder if there's a magic amount of mason stain, or does it depend on the color? That's one question. And the other question is, I found a recipe for black slip, which I thought would be kind of interesting on the white, but it's got 14% manganese dioxide, and it just seemed a bit much.
Yeah.
In a 100-gram batch. So it's mostly red art. It's 46.73 red art, 23.36 ball clay, 14.02 manganese dioxide, and 11.21 black stain, and 4.67 red iron oxide. So it all adds up to 100. But that manganese dioxide just threw me, because I thought, holy moly, that's number one. It's kind of expensive. And it just seems a huge amount.
That does seem like a huge amount. And the thing with that much manganese and red iron oxide and mason stain, I would expect your glaze to have pinholes and some bubbling, because those colorants, they give off oxygen during the firing. So when you have high concentrations of especially iron and manganese, and you find this a lot with black clay bodies too, is like, I get a lot of questions of people that are using black clay, and they get a lot of bubbling that happens with their glazes over top, like just a clear glaze over black clay. And it's, yeah, and so it's the colorant, all of the colorants are releasing oxygen during the firing, and then it's, it depends on the glaze that's over top, whether at what point the glaze starts melting versus at what point the off-gassing happens, whether that's going to affect the glazes. But so with your first question, you were making, so what was your process for making the slip with the M370?
I just take a bucket of dried scraps, and then I water and slake it down, and then I use my whipper to mix it up, and I just add a bit of water. I haven't been adding anything else other than the colorant and only mason stains. I haven't tried any oxides or anything in it, but I wondered if there's some way that I can, if I start off with a color, once I add the stain, is there, because it's unpredictable once it's fired, I wondered if there's any way to, it's not really stabilize it, but make it more predictable. And that's just kind of, I'm sure it's a hit or miss kind of a thing until I get a color that or a combination that I like.
Yeah. So
500 grams of my slip, my white slip, and then I add 10%. Well, I don't even know how to measure it. Like a teaspoon, I guess, would be what I'd start with.
Right.
Or I've had too much mason stain, I think.
Okay. So are you weighing the dry clay? Because that's what I would do.
As usual, right? I just take a measurement. So I'll take a 500 milliliter yogurt container. So 2 cups, basically.
Right. Okay.
And then I'll put in a scoop. So I'm trying to stay to a teaspoon and then mix it up. And then I really whip it up to get it dispersed. And then, the color's really nice. I'll try it one time. If it's too dark, I'll just throw in some more clay, flip into the mix to water it down, so to speak. Yeah.
So what I would do is I would weigh your dry clay before you turn it into slip. And then you have the dry weight, and then you add 10% of that weight in mason stain. Okay. And then that's how you're going to get consistency. So if you're starting with 500 grams of dried up, smushed up clay, then you can add 50 grams of mason stain, and then you'll know that you'll have that consistency where the color is always going to come out the same. And then you're just adding water and slaking it down, like you said,
right.
And blending it up. And so, yeah, so I would start with that, because that's going to help you. And then when you fire your test, so you can try all of your mason stains at 10%, and then you can adjust depending on how your results come out. And
that makes
and some of the mason stains, like they change color at cone 6 especially, so they retain their color at bisque. So you might fire it and it comes out of bisque looking exactly like the color in the bag, and then it comes out of the glaze firing and then the color is totally changed, and that's normal.
That's exactly it. So it really is kind of a hit or miss thing, and I just try to go with whatever the result is and pretend I meant it like that. Or else,
and it's usually like the pinks and purples and reds that are gonna change color quite a bit at cone 6, like versus at bisque temperatures.
Bisque colors always seem to be fine, and I think I'm so excited. Then I'll put glaze on and fire it, and I go, oh my, that's totally different. It's kind of fun to take a picture of it before and after, just to see what happens.
Yeah, and then sometimes, so when if you do some test tiles or something, I would put your clear glaze over half of the slip, and then just because sometimes the slip will change color with the clear over top, but it stays the same color on the raw clay. And
Oh,
that,
okay. Yeah.
yeah, we just did a bunch of tests with some chrysanthos underglazes where we just bought like 15 different colors at Cedar Hill Studio where I work. And so we tested them all with our clear glaze on and without clear glaze. And yeah, a bunch of them completely changed colors. Like we bought two, one gray and one beige, and both of them are like this light blue color. They're both like the same color, but they look completely different than they looked in the bottle. And then yeah, and then like the pink, we bought like a violet and a pink, and the pink like completely disappeared at cone 6, but it was fine. It was fine like at bisque temperature. And then some of the pinks and purples, like you can barely see them. Like it's like there's a little bit of color left, but then most of that color has burnt out,
Okay.
which is disappointing because they were marketed to be for cone 6. And so we were like, well, these aren't that great, but it was just, yeah, it was just a couple of colors. And I knew that pinks have a tendency to do that, but I just wanted to try it. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks,
yeah.
Sue.
No problem. I'm just answering a question. Vinky, is there any regular percentage one should add regarding stains? So are you talking about mason stains? Like generally with mason stains, if I'm adding them to a glaze or a slip, we generally start with 10%, and then we can go up or down from there, depending on the fired results. So yeah, Matthew.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I grabbed a couple of cups just to show. So the blue on the left is 5%, and you know this coral red is 10%. So it really just depends on what the color is that you're adding. I mean, I think on the blue I tested down from 1% to maybe 8 or 9%, and I mean really anything past 4 or 5 there wasn't any difference. So you can actually save quite a bit of money that way if you do that test.
For sure. Yeah, I would definitely go with the smallest percentage that gives you the color that you want. Because when you start adding more stain than you need, then yeah, it gets expensive. And then you can also have issues like the more colorant there is in a glaze or in a slip, you can have issues with off-gassing and compatibility with glazes and that sort of thing. Yeah, so that's a good point. Like, yeah, maybe you could start with 5%, and then if it's not, like if the color isn't as bold as you want, then you could increase. Or you could just do like right off the bat, you could do like, 3%, 5%, 7, 9, and just like see what you get. Depends how much testing you want to do. Right. Karen Wilms says, what about red iron oxide? Percentage. So it depends what you're making, Karen. Like I've seen some glazes have up to 15, like our Randy's Red has 15% red iron oxide in it. We don't actually make a slip with red iron oxide in it. But it's, pardon me, I would usually with the oxides, you need much less than the mason stains, but red iron oxide isn't a very powerful colorant. So oftentimes you'll see glazes and with a lot more. But I would just try like with red iron oxide, maybe 5%, 10%, 15% even, and just see what happens. But yeah, again, with high percentages of iron, you're going to have that off-gassing. And so it's going to depend on the glaze that you put over top of it, whether you may see some issues with that. So hopefully that answers your question, Karen, from the chat. And let me know if you want to come on video and chat with me. Karen, can I see you? I cannot see you. Can I promote you to, I'm going to promote you to panelist. And then you can, then hopefully we'll be able to see you. And you can have a chat if you like. Just reading another question here. Barry, your advice on what's going on with these two glazes I've been working on with a friend would be appreciated. Both glazes are taken from recipe books on glazing. Beautiful color, just as per the photos in the glaze book, but glaze just flaking away from pot. Glaze is very runny and has pinholing. Love the color and especially the way it pools, but how to avoid the streaking? Can I send you some photos to clarify? Yeah, photos would be really helpful. I don't know if I could accept photos here somehow. But yeah, photos would be really helpful to understand what you're saying. The glaze is flaking away from the pot. I don't know if you mean before it enters the kiln. So sometimes a glaze will flake off of the pot as the glaze is drying. So I'm going to promote you to panelist, and then maybe you can explain. And I see Karen's here now too. So Karen, if you wanna talk, you are welcome to. Sorry, trying to promote Barry.
Hi.
Here. Hi. Yeah, Karen. So with the red iron oxide, what application, like what would you be adding it to, I guess?
Yeah, I guess we're just experimenting with using it as a stain, and it's just burning out with our clear glazes. So just kind of where that baseline is, where you're actually getting that richness of color without it just burning right out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we use a red iron oxide just as a stain. So we just like straight up red iron oxide with water, a little bit of Gersley borate, just to keep it from, like, to keep it stuck to the pot, really. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't, like, people, I think when they're painting the stain on their bisqueware and it turns this bright red color, they're expecting a lot of color when it comes out of the glaze firing, and a lot of that color just kind of disappears. Yeah. And they're just getting like the brown highlights. Yeah. And and I think that's just how iron is. But I mean, that's 100% red iron oxide, but it's just watered down. So I think that's just the way it is. Yeah.
Thanks.
Totally. Barry, if you want to have a chat, you can unmute yourself.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
So, yeah, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
I didn't know how to send you the photos. Unfortunately, I'm in the UK and we're all in lockdown, and the glaze pieces are with Debbie, who I believe is also on the chat here.
Okay.
So, if you need to see the actual pieces, then I'd ask you to maybe Debbie will come online and show you the pieces. But I have some photos on my computer. I didn't know how to send them to you. So the piece where the glaze is coming off the pot is actually after firing. So it looks great in the photo. It looks great, but the glaze has flaked away from the pot, from the test piece.
And so is the glaze, is it happening during the firing in the kiln, where you're opening the kiln and the glaze is on the shelves?
So you touch the surface and then it just, your dreams are shattered.
Oh, yeah, that's not very good at all. No. So that would be called shivering. Okay. And yeah, so shivering is basically the opposite of crazing. So shivering happens when your glaze has really low thermal expansion. And basically the way thermal expansion works is in the firing, everything when it's heated expands, and then when it cools, it contracts. And so if you have a glaze that expands and contracts more than your clay body, then you're going to have crazing. So your clay body like is here and it expands and contracts, and then you have your glaze over top. The glaze expands and contracts, and if the glaze contracts more than the clay body, then basically it's trying to, there's so much tension that the glaze will crack to relieve that stress, and that is where crazing comes from. Shivering is the opposite. Shivering is where the glaze expands and contracts less than the clay body. So basically it's not contracting enough. So the clay body is contracting more during that cooling cycle than the glaze. And so the glaze is like too big for the clay. And so glaze will pop off because it's like, it's no longer, it's just like, it's like your jeans are too big. They just fall off, right? Whereas with crazing, it's like your jeans are too small, or your pants, you know, if you have stretchy pants, are too small and they start ripping because of that tension. Well, it's like shivering is the opposite, where it's like the glaze is too big for the clay body. And I see Deborah has raised her hand, so I'm going to promote her to panelist. Oh, Elsa, yeah?
Hi, yes.
Hi.
First, thank you for doing this. It is amazing. I've been looking for some answers to a bunch of things for a long time until I found your website. And I have a couple of questions that I don't know if it's pertinent to a lot of people. I don't want to be wasting everyone's like time for like a question that's only up for me. But I worked in clay in New York for like 10 years. And then I moved back home, which is Ecuador. And I'm first of all having trouble finding materials. And second of all, the materials that I do find, they are like frit.
Right.
Nothing. And then there's just like cobalt oxide. Like I don't know any, like nephsite, I don't have any. I have one kaolin that I don't know which one is. It's just kaolin in like a bag that just says kaolin, and frit is just frit. And I'm having a really hard time using glazing and like adapting my glazes. I did adapt a bunch of them, so I kind of like was able to get one core like palette, but I'm having such a hard time getting a pink. It took me like 6 months just to get chrome oxide, and then I don't know if it's like my feldspar, it's sodic or a potassious, whatever, I don't know how to say that. And so I don't know if you have any hint of how to deal with like these like non-specific materials. And
Right. Yeah, so that's tricky because a frit, like there are so many different kinds of frits, and they all have different numbers, and they're all formulated completely differently. So if you have a frit that's just called frit, like I don't know how you deal with that. Like, is that how they're selling them, or do you just have like a bag of material that you got from someone?
It's really hard to get material in general, and
Yeah.
when I do, it's just frit. I mean, it's just one kind that you get, and I have like 3 different providers of things, but everything is just kind of like that, like just frit, just kaolin, just nephsite. There's no numbers. I mean, I get the flint, I do get 200 mesh and 325, and that's the only like numbered thing that I have. But I don't know, they probably do not match any kind of like listing on glazing for components. So I kind of eyeballed it and got a bunch of clay, some of them really nice that actually work, but then some of them need tweaking, and I don't really know how to do it. And I really want to pink, and it's not happening.
Yeah. So Glazy on the website, they have a like it's like a social kind of like Facebook, where you can post questions and people can respond. And I think that would be a good place to go to see if there are any other potters in your area that have kind of run into these same issues, and if they have any advice, because without like I'm not really sure how I could like what like if I mean feldspar, so you can have soda feldspar or potash feldspar, and generally a feldspar is a feldspar. Like they have a form or a chemical analysis, and most feldspars are pretty close to the same. So if you had a soda feldspar and you found a recipe that called for soda or Minspar or Kona, like there's a bunch of brand names. Like Minspar is a brand of soda feldspar, and Kona, those are brand names. But then you can just have like sodium feldspar, and it's just a generic analysis, and it should work about the same. Nepheline cyanite, like it's kind of like a feldspar, where it melts at a bit of a lower temperature. And what else did you mention? Yeah, like with the frit, I'm not sure how you could figure out what type of frit you have.
I mean, basically what I've been doing, just kind of eyeballing it and finding like the most different, like similar thing that I could. But then Gersley Boret, it's impossible. Most of the glazes, at least the recipes that I had that I've developed over the years, they do have Gersley Boret. And I'm trying to find substitutes, but it's still really inaccurate. And I'm making like hundreds and hundreds of the styles to get like 5.
Right. Yeah. So if I were to make an assumption, so a lot of frits, we use frits because they contain boron, and boron is something that's hard to come by naturally because borax or boric acid is soluble, so it doesn't work in glazes. And so that's often why frits are used in glaze, because they contain boron. And Gersley borate is the other main ingredient where we can get boron from. So if you found a recipe with Gersley borate, I would try a test with the frit, because like frit 3134 is basically a really close analysis to Gersley borate, so they can kind of be interchanged. And so I would maybe just try to replace Gersley borate with the frit that you have and see what happens. And I would just be concerned. So if your glaze is running, then that's something that you could probably deal with. If your glaze comes out under fired, then like that's a bit trickier. But if your glaze is running, then you could adjust the silica and alumina. Like you could increase the silica and your kaolin to reduce the running, so that it's kind of a better place to start from if you try that.
I tried 2 forms. I tried doing the frit thing, and most of it came under fired.
Okay.
And then I thought I add silica and alumina, but because I do got the like raw silica and just the alumina oxide, dioxide, and I thought I'd do that. But also I made another test when I changed the Gersley borate for I have boron oxide. I try to make some sort of like weird conversion that's not accurate at all, and it also came out under fired. So I figured I'd get the boron from boron oxide, and I don't know, I don't think it worked.
Yeah, I would stay away from alumina oxide in glazes because it has a hard time melting. Whereas I would use the best way to get alumina into your glaze is through kaolin. So if you're trying to increase the alumina, like in your UMF, I would be adding kaolin. And I mean, kaolin, like EPK is just another brand name of kaolin. So most kaolins are going to be close enough, I think. If you just have, if you just have kaolin, I would just use that whenever a recipe calls for EPK or Grauleg or even ball clay. Like you could just use that kaolin and just like hope for the best, kind of. But I would, I don't know if you're in my Facebook group, but
I think yesterday, 2 days ago, I signed up.
Okay. So that would be a good question to ask, because there's people, there's 3,000 people in there from all over the world. And so maybe, and I know there's people in Central and South America, and that have a lot of knowledge about glaze chemistry. And so they might have suggestions for you.
Thank you.
For ways to get around all of this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I
have a question.
Okay, I'm just reading just a message someone sent me. I can show you the test on the screen. Yeah, so I just want to get back to Barry's question, Barry and Deborah. So Deborah, if you don't mind turning your video on, and then yeah, if you can do a screen share, or yeah, right there. Okay. And so that's the glaze that is shivering? Oh, I'm gonna
share it. You just give me 1 sec.
I just need to unmute you. Okay.
So you can see the bits are coming off in my hand.
Okay. Yeah, and that's actually really dangerous because, you know, they're sharp and, okay. Yeah. So do you have the recipe for this glaze? Like, I'm going to guess it has a lot of lithium in it.
It's the strontium love child free, I think it is.
Okay.
Which is from
Love child.
It's from Linda Bloomfield's book.
Okay.
And the recipe, I'm just going to go back to it now. Bear with me. She says under pressure.
No worries.
Hey. I might have to type the ingredients in the notes because I apologise, I haven't got them to hand.
Well, are you guys in my Facebook group?
I don't think we are.
It's called Understanding Glazes with Sue. And I think it would be helpful because for me to analyze your recipe here would just take a lot of time. But if you guys could request to join my group, Understanding Glazes with Sue, and then post a photo, this exact photo, I would love if you could post that in the group, because that's going to be a really good learning tool for others to see. And then if you could post the recipe, and then I can kind of just explain what's happening or what I think is happening, and possibly how you could adjust that glaze recipe. But
this is the other one, Sue, with a pinholing. Can you see?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's beautiful inside. It's perfect crackle, which is what it's supposed to be. But it always pinholes on the sides, on the inside.
Yeah. So
they're perfect in the bottom.
Right. Yeah. No, it's lovely. Pinholing is one of those things that I don't have a definitive answer for. And I think there's lots of different reasons for why glazes are pinholing, which is why there isn't like one answer to solve them. Yeah, that's really nice. So this is Barry, is this the pinholing glaze?
This is the one.
The shivering.
No, the pin. Yes, so pinholing. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I see all those little spots. And
also sort of tends to form rivulets, which is great where it pools, but much less nice on. Also, it seems to do much better on the inside of the bowl than on the outside of the bowl. I just don't understand why.
Right.
Why that is. So that would be also great information.
Well, I think the inside of the bowl retains the heat, possibly gets hotter than the outside. And so I don't know if it was last week that someone had a question where their glaze was glossy on the inside but matte on the outside. And I think it's the same sort of thing where the inside of the bowl, you know, you've got like this kind of enclosed space to hold the heat. And I think that that the glaze is just getting hotter. And I think, so the glaze that you showed me is really quite fluid and runny. And I think that like glazes often will just have little air bubbles here and there. like within the glaze. And then when the glaze starts running and moving, then those air bubbles get exposed and then they pop. And so I think that if you were able to adjust that glaze recipe so that it ran a little bit less, but the thing is, like, I can tell by the way you describe it, the thing that you like about it is that it's running. And because because it's pooling and you get the rivulets and it's lovely, like where it's moving and running. But I think that might also be contributing to the pinholes, because I had these really lovely glazes that the more they ran, like when they ran more, I liked how they looked more, but then I also got more pinholes. And so it was just like, I couldn't find this. So if I was trying like firing them to a lower temperature, and then they didn't look right at all, because you weren't getting, like, they were just under fired basically. And so there's this tricky balance between like the look that you want, but then also like the glaze functioning the way that you want as well, like fashion versus function. And
if I could just add one supplemental, if Debbie's going to need to look in her little book here. So we tried adding, she's our record keeper, I can't remember. She tried adding, we tried adding something to stop it. I can't remember offhand what it was, and we tried it over quite a big range, and it didn't really seem to make that much difference. If Debbie could let you know, maybe you can tell us if we're barking up the wrong tree, if there's some other addition we might make. Debbie, I'm hoping you can.
Yeah, I'm going to scan through the book, but I don't know while I look whether it's worth just telling you there's only 4 ingredients in this glaze plus the colorant, and it's nepheline cyanite, standard borax frit, whiting and bentonite, and we're using copper carbonate for the colouring. So those are the only ingredients. And we looked up how to do run reduction, and I'm frantically looking through my book trying to remember what it was we tried. And it worked a little bit, but not a lot.
Okay.
Oh, hang on a minute. To reduce runs, what was it we used? I might have to come back to you on that because I don't want to hold everybody up, but
no problem.
I will look it up and I will tell you exactly what we did.
So just without knowing the percentages in this recipe, I can see there's no clay in the recipe, and clay is where we get alumina. Like there could be alumina in this frit. I'm not so sure, but there is no clay in the recipe, which is why there's bentonite. Bentonite helps to keep glazes in suspension. So if you have no clay in your glaze recipe, then your glaze is just gonna cement in the bottom of the bucket. It's gonna hard pan. But so alumina is what increases the viscosity of your melted glaze during the firing. And so adding clay, so EPK, grow leg, ball clay, those are the 3 that I generally, I would only use grow leg in a glaze if I was like really concerned about a pure, if it was going to be a clear glaze or a celadon where I didn't want any like trace iron or titanium, because ball clay and EPK both have a little bit of iron and titanium. So I would add EPK, and like if I could analyze this formula, I could kind of tell you like what percentages to add, so we can work on that after.
Thank you.
But yeah, just offhand, it looks like it's going to be a really runny glaze just from the ingredients.
That's the original test tile. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it absolutely pools down at the bottom.
Yeah.
Does that consistently.
And that's why you get that nice texture, like where it like pools in the texture, because you want the glaze to be moving a little bit, but it might just be moving a little too much. But that's not the glaze that was shivering, is it?
No, that's
okay.
That's a different shade.
Two ends of the same two ends of the spectrum.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
yeah.
Thank you so much for all the information. That's been absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm just checking the chat here. Do glaze chemicals get old? No, they are very old to begin with. And so the thing that can happen with glaze chemicals is they can absorb moisture if they're not contained in an airtight container. But just the fact that all of our glaze chemicals came from the earth and are millions of years old to start with by the time we get them, there's nothing that's really going to happen with age except for the absorption of moisture. And so sometimes that can cause problems if you've had glaze chemicals in your garage for years, and then you go to try to use them again and they're really hard and clumpy. And so sometimes, like my zinc, it's pretty damp in my studio, and so I had to calcine some of my zinc, which means I just put it in a bowl in the bisque firing, and then that just drives off any residual moisture. And you don't even have to go as high as bisque temperature, but since I'm already firing to bisque temperatures anyways, I just stuck some of my zinc in a bowl, and then that just like drove off all the extra moisture. Gerstley borate is another one that gets clumpy. Yeah, and so I would just try to keep them as airtight as possible. Bill, do you have a question? I see, oh, nice. Okay, reading another question in the chat. So there is, Eric is offering help from Brazil to Elsa. So hopefully Elsa.
I just don't know how to answer to him and not bother everyone else.
Oh yeah, don't worry about, I don't know how, I think you can scroll through all of the people and send a private message, but don't worry about having a private conversation. Like, I don't mind. I think it could help other people that might be watching.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, so did someone else have a question that I was trying to kind of keep up with everyone? Oh, here's another question in the chat. Can you mix buckets of the same glaze recipe together? I have an old bucket of glaze that is running low and made a new bucket. Can they be mixed together? Yeah, we do that all the time. So, I mean, I work in a public studio, and so we just make new glaze and add it to the old glaze. The only thing that can really happen to an old glaze, depending how old it is water can evaporate, and so the glaze is going to thicken. Sometimes if there's a lot of temperature change, you can find like some pretty fantastic looking crystals on the top of your glaze if you have soluble materials in your glaze, and so they tend to crystallize, like if they get warm and then they cool, then they get warm and cool. Sometimes you'll open your glaze bucket and you'll have like these big crystals on the top, and those can be dissolved with hot water. But generally there isn't a reason that I've had glazes just dry up completely, and I just add water, mix them really well, like with a drill and a paint mixer or a hand blender, and then I measure specific gravity to get the water to where I want it, and then they're good to go. Just reading the comments. How do you prevent shivering? So shivering you would have to change the glaze recipe. I mean, it's a relationship with the glaze and the clay body that you're using. If I saw the glaze recipe, I would guess that it might have a lot of lithium in it. So lithium has really low thermal expansion and is often used to prevent crazing, which is the opposite of shivering. But shivering is actually easier to remedy than crazing. So shivering is a lot less common. And so there's different ways you can go about fixing shivering, it's going to just depend on the recipe that you're starting with. So there isn't really like an easy answer, of course, because it's ceramics and there's nothing is like straightforward. This is the answer every time. Okay, so I think I'm caught up with the chat. So anyone in the room that has a question, wants to say something? And if not, I can go through my, so Bill had a question. Did you want to?
Yeah, I've got a question about glaze fit. I'll show you an example in a minute.
Okay.
But if the pot comes out of the kiln cracked, how do you diagnose what probably happened?
Okay. So
here's an example, if it helps.
Yeah.
And this is a slip cast tumbler, so you can see it's very thin.
Yeah.
So I kind of assumed that possibly the expansion of one of these three glazes may be different than what's on the inside. And I'm not sure, you know, how do I proceed with kind of diagnosing that, and what change should I make?
Right. So we were talking last week. Have you ever used Digital Fire or Insight Live?
Yes.
Is the glaze calculation software. So last week we were talking about how you can enter a glaze recipe into Insight Live, and then it will give you a coefficient of thermal expansion. And I was saying how it's not completely accurate, but it can be used to compare recipes for sure. And so there are 3 glazes on the outside, you say? And then there's just one glaze on the inside? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, so the inside is that Tony Hansen 5x20.
Yeah, okay.
And then the outside, this orange is a Val Cushing matte. The blue is from Ron Roy's book. It's Bright Sky Blue, which is a glossy base one. So we've got multiple glazes here with different expansions.
Yeah.
It's the first time I've had that happen with. Typically with the 5x20 the inside, I haven't had any kind of cracking with other glaze combinations.
Right. And and was that the only piece that cracked, or was that the only piece that was glazed like that?
Yes.
So that, okay.
Yes, it was the only one that cracked, and it was the only one glazed like this.
Okay. Yeah, so because I mean, sometimes things just happen. Like we opened the kiln recently, and there was a tumbler that was like the exact same shape as that, very, very thin, and it was cracked just like that, and I couldn't explain it because it had the same glaze on the inside and the outside. And my only thing is, it was in our gas kiln, and it was like really close to where the burners are, like, you know, entering the kiln. So I was thinking maybe it just got a shock from maybe cool air entering through the burner ports, or I couldn't explain it because it wasn't like it had 2 different glazes on the inside and outside. But the woman who made the piece, she had, you know, like a dozen of the same cups in the kiln, and that was the only one that cracked. So I'm just kind of chalking it up as, you know, one of those things that happen sometimes. That doesn't have an explanation that, well, I can't think of what the explanation is. So I would maybe try it again and see if it happens again. But yeah, I would maybe check, like, enter those recipes into Insight Live and see if there's a big difference between the thermal expansion. But those, I mean, I often see it like where there's like a really stable glaze on the outside and then a really runny glaze on the inside. That's where I see often a lot of denting, but it looks like the glazes on the outside of your piece were quite stable and thin. And so it just doesn't look like typically like a piece, like when I see denting, I often see like a really thick coat on the inside. So if the clear on the inside is just really, really thick compared to the wall thickness of your clay, that could be another reason where there's just too much tension from the glaze being too thick. But if you can actually complete the break and just kind of look at the difference in thickness of the glaze on the inside and the outside compared to the clay body, that's another thing that I would look at. But I don't have an answer at this point. So, yeah, yes, please do.
So this may be helpful, may not, but I'm a slip caster as well, and I'm also a klutz. So sometimes I might bump my work, you know, when it's bone dry or whatever, and I look at it and it looks fine. I don't see any cracks or anything, and I go through the whole process: bisque, glaze, fire, and then it comes out cracked just like that. So
yeah, could have been bumped. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking with this one pot that was in our last gas firing that cracked. That, yeah, maybe it had a teeny tiny crack to begin with, and then the glaze firing just accentuates kind of anything that's wrong with it. Yes, Elsa.
So I have a question similar to that, because I have this combination of glazes that I use all the time, which is like a matte, metal-y looking one, and then I put on top of a white one that gives this like cool effect, and I use it all the time. But then I have this blades that I did, a bunch of them, and they all came up with the same hairline crack around the bottom, and then it goes like here. I mean, I've been using them a lot because I couldn't sell them, so I've been using them a lot. They won't break. I mean, I tested them, I hit them, they're not breaking. The glaze kind of crazed. So I'm not sure if it's just a crazing because of the fit. Maybe I went too hard on like too much in the bottom and it's testing it, or it's just the shape of this one, because I use this combination a lot because I really like that galaxy looking thing. Yeah. So, but this one cracked. I don't know why.
Right. And so the other thing that can happen is if you have a really wide flat bottom with no glaze on the one side, and then you have a high expansion glaze on the inside, then and especially if your glaze is pooling, and which it probably is, like if it's giving you the galaxies and things like that usually happens when a glaze is pooling, and so that having no glaze on the underside, that's like a thermal expansion mismatch. So you have this glaze that's contracting a lot on the inside, but nothing to kind of counter it on the bottom. So that is often when like I'll see, and it could also be that the glaze is pooling so much that the thickness of the glaze, as I was saying earlier, if the thickness of the glaze exceeds the thickness of the clay, then you can get cracking around.
Yeah, because I do it in like, I have like plate, like dining plates that do the same thing, and this doesn't happen. It's just like in this specific shape. So it might be that I went too thick on the bottom, or it's just this shape, it's just weird, and it just isn't distributed right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe if the glaze was a little thinner on the inside, did you say that was the only one that cracked, or all that shape?
I made 30 of this shape, and I think like maybe 20 did crack.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I know, that was like a big miss.
Yeah. So, yeah, like, so in the future, you could put a foot ring, and then, so you can glaze the bottom, like if you add a foot ring on the bottom of your piece, so that you can have glaze on the top and the bottom. Or if you, have you like broken one of those pieces completely?
No.
It's
hard.
Yeah.
I tried and I hit it a bunch of things. I hit it with a hammer and it didn't break. And I figured, okay, these are not going to break. I can't sell them, but I've been using it to toss salads. I gave a bunch of them to my mom.
Yeah. So one thing I like to do with a pot that has failed is break it, and then examine like the thickness of the glaze compared to the thickness of the clay, and like the inside glaze versus the outside glaze. And if there's like, you know, if the glaze is thicker than the clay, you're going to have problems. And then if the inside glaze is a lot thicker than the outside glaze, you're often going to have problems. And then especially with having those wide bottoms with no glaze on the underneath, that can often lead to cracking as well.
And the crack, you can kind of see a little crack in here from the clay also.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't normally glaze the bottoms or put rims because this clay slumps a little bit. So I've seen that when sometimes I do put a rim, sometimes it like drops and glaze.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tricky. So you might have to just reduce the thickness of the glaze on the inside, maybe. That's one thing.
Like stayed away from this shape. I figured like that, but that was like not good.
Yeah, it's too bad you made so many of them, and then
yeah. Ordered. I had to I have to like do a lot of things to fill that order later, but yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's fine. Now I have a lot of salad things. I buy my friends for salad, and they look nice.
Yeah. So just looking at the question and answer section, Caroline says, I'd love to substitute lead bisilicate in my tin glaze on glazing.org. How can I do that? Okay, so I admit that I have no experience with lead glazes. Lead is an RO flux. So an RO flux is like the alkaline earth fluxes. And so they are in the second column of the periodic table, which is magnesium, calcium, strontium, and barium, and then also zinc. And then lead is also in that category, except that we don't generally use lead anymore. That would be what I would maybe try to replace the lead with calcium, but honestly, I'm just kind of guessing here because I've never worked with lead, and I know like lead produces like really vibrant colors and really glossy glazes, like high gloss surfaces, but yeah, so I'm sorry that I can't answer your question about lead. And Caroline, if you want to get on here and chat with me, just raise your hand and then I can promote you to be a panelist. Oh, and I'm going to, yeah, and if anyone else that has joined late wants to talk, I can just raise your hand. There's a little button on the bottom, and then I can promote you to be a panelist as well. And then we can chat. So, yeah, and so as far as lead, that might be something that I would go on to glazy.org and just post a question, because there are just so many people that are using that site, and they have so much more experience and different experience than I have. And so like I just have experience with what I've personally tested and tried, and like the courses that I've taken in ceramic glaze chemistry, like it was like, we're not talking about lead, because my teacher, Matt Katz, he didn't want to be responsible for us using lead irresponsibly. So he was like, I'm just not going to teach it because I don't want you to use it and I don't want you to harm yourselves. And so that's about all that I know about lead. Kirti Shah, I see you've joined us on the chat. Did you have a question? I'm going to unmute you. I'm trying to unmute you. I think you might be frozen. Oh. Your video is frozen. Oh, I can hear you.
Good evening from India. Overlapping glaze, I want to know about overlapping glaze.
What kind of glaze?
I want to know about.
I'm sorry, you're cutting out.
Glaze at the con 6 firing Hello?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you, but you're cutting out, so I'm not getting full sentences.
I want to know.
Yep.
I want to know about the overlapping glaze.
I'm not getting, what kind of glaze?
I want to know about overlapping glaze. Overlapping glaze on the sanitary ware, wash basin, bowls, overlapping glaze, glossy glaze, high glossy glaze.
High glossy glaze, I heard that.
Overlapping,
overlapping
color
glaze,
3 color glaze.
Okay, I'm sorry, Kirti, that I can't hear you very well. Your voice is cutting out, but would you be able to type your question into the chat, and I would be happy to. Overlapping glazes, I see, I think you're asking about overlapping glazes, but I'm just not sure what the question is. So if you could type your question in the chat, that would be really helpful. And I don't know if it's the internet connection. Yeah, I'm just hearing like little clips of your voice here and there, so I can actually hear.
So in the time, I'm use the cone 6 glaze in my product. I'm useful with the cone 6 glaze.
Cone 6 glaze, I heard that.
Yeah, and always I am using cone 6 glaze.
Okay.
And I want to get more double color glaze effect in the wash basins and some big bowls and everything. So I don't know about the how to maintain the quality, density, everything.
The density, like, I'm sorry, that
for the 3 glaze.
Yes. So you want to apply 2 or 3 glazes on top of each other?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And then are you having challenges?
So I am not popular with this. How to maintain the quality or how much density I should keep. Which one is the first layer? Which one is the second layer? Which one is the third layer?
Okay. I mean, what I would do is I would make some test pots. So like some small bowls or something that's really fast to make. And then okay. I would try, so I don't know if when you say density, are you talking about like specific gravity and the water content?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then you're also wondering about like which one to put first and second and third.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay. So if you're overlapping glazes, so the issue that can come with adding too many or multiple glazes to a piece, I won't say too many, but is that your bisque absorbs the water from the glaze, and then your bisque becomes saturated with water, and then adding another layer of glaze is introducing more water to your bisque, and eventually your bisque becomes completely saturated with water, and then it's not able to absorb more glaze. And so when you're wanting to use multiple glazes, there's a balance between having enough water so that you're not getting too thick of a layer, because if you have if you have 3 glazes and they all have a low water content, so a high specific gravity, then you're going to get a thicker glaze layer. Then you could have issues with the glaze running, or if the glaze application is too thick. But then if you add more water to lower the specific gravity, then the issue would come from the bisque becoming saturated with water, in which case I would just like do your layering over a longer period of time. And I mean, it's possible, like I would maybe aim for, it always depends on the glaze, but I would say like a specific gravity of 1.4 is on the lower side. So that has, you know, more water, like on kind of on the spectrum of specific gravity. And so if you wanted to have thinner glaze layers so that you could add more glaze layers, then you would maybe bring your specific gravity down to about 1.4, and then you could do those multiple dips. But you want to make sure that your glaze has time to dry in between. And so if you find that when you're layering glazes and the actual glaze itself isn't drying, you know how like when you dip your pot into a glaze, the glaze, it appears to dry instantly. And so if you're finding that it's taking longer to dry, then there's a good chance that your bisque is becoming saturated. So then you would want to just like leave that piece, if you can, put a fan on it and then come back the next day and add more layers of glaze. So I hope that's helpful. I see that you're not on the video chat anymore. Oh, there you are. So let me know if that's helpful. Oh, I think you're muted now. I'm unmuting you. So was that helpful at all? I don't know if I answered your question.
So if I want to do on the, not on the biscuit, I want to do on the direct on the dry pieces.
Oh, okay.
Of 3-layer glaze.
Okay. So in that case, I would, yeah, I haven't done a lot of raw glazing, like where I haven't bisque fired. We do in our kids' classes, we let the kids paint glaze on their pots before we fire them, so that sometimes they don't go through a bisque firing. But I don't have experience with like dipping, you know, cups and bowls that haven't been bisque fired. But I would imagine, because bone dry clay is vulnerable to water. So you don't want too much water to come in contact with your bone dry clay, because then your pots can start to dissolve. So so I would want the specific gravity to be on the higher side, which means less water, so that you're not, because if your raw clay becomes saturated with water, then it's going to just turn into a pile of mush.
And can I use with the big bowl, with the spraying glazing system?
Oh yeah, spraying would be a great system for raw glazing. Yeah.
No, for the bigger bowl, it's not possible to the dipping.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
So for the 3-layer glaze, can I use the spray?
Yeah. I think that's a really good idea. For like to spray big bowls. Definitely.
So overlapping glaze with the spray gun is okay, no problem.
Yeah, no problem.
And the same density.
Yeah, so we have a spray booth where I work, and we use the same glazes from in the buckets with the spray gun, and it's fine. And so the only thing is if you find that your gun is clogging, so where it's getting clogged with glaze, then you might need to thin your glaze down a little bit by adding a little bit more water. But generally with spraying, again, you don't want there to be too much water, so that you're just spraying mostly water. Your pot is getting soaked with water before you get a good layer of glaze on there. So I would maybe try your specific gravity, keep it around 1.5 or even a little bit higher for spraying.
Okay.
And then if you have any troubles with your gun where you're spraying and you have to clean your gun, then maybe you could thin it down a little bit.
Okay.
Okay.
And yeah, very much thankful to you.
Oh
this.
yeah, no problem.
So
Thanks
I
for
have
coming.
also I have a good experience with the glaze, Con 6 glaze, and raw glaze, mostly raw glazes.
Raw glazes. And are
Yeah.
you part of, there's a Facebook group called Single Fire Ceramics.
Yes.
Yeah, are
Single
you
fire
in that
ceramic.
group? Okay. Yeah, because I'm learning a lot just watching the posts in that group. Like I said, I don't have the experience with the glazing the pots before bisque firing, but it's something that I'm definitely interested in, and I find that's a good group.
Yeah. Anybody wants for the single firing with the raw glaze, I can help.
Okay, that's very
Any
kind.
color. So I have my own factory for the pigments. I'm making ceramic pigments also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like,
And
you have a factory?
Yeah, I have a factory for the ceramic pigments in India.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. And having a good experience, 35 years experience in the ceramic.
Okay. Yeah.
Anybody wants to know something, I can help.
That's very kind. Yeah, thank you. I saw that you posted in my Facebook group as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
I follow you. I follow you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for offering your experience. That's very kind.
Yeah.
And do you export your pigments like to America?
Yes, not America, but nearby India.
Okay. Yep. That's
Anybody
great.
wants the pigments and raw glazes, I can supply. I can supply any country. No
and
problem.
What's your company called?
My company name is Gita Ceramic.
Gita Ceramic. Okay.
Yes.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Me too. And very nice I am very much pleased to talk with you.
You as well. Yeah, it's nice that we can talk. We're very far apart.
Yeah, we are very far. You are on the eastern side, and we are on I am on the eastern side, and you are the western side.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, thank you so much.
Me too. Thank you.
Jody, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. And it may be something I have to go on glazing support with. But, we have a glaze called Rosie's Red, which I think is not an unusual glaze. And we had, good results with it and so forth. But I run a bed and breakfast, and so I only get to be in my studio in the winter. And at the end of last winter, I started to mix up a big bucket of it because we're really only just starting out with doing glaze testing and that sort of thing. And your course on that was really helpful. I didn't even learn about specific gravity, or I don't remember it from art school or anything like that. But anyway, so I mixed up part of a bucket of Rosie's Red, but I was short on Iron Oxide. So I just put it aside, and I thought I had the right notes on it. And then when we finally came back after a summer of making people's breakfasts, I added what I needed. And then we put a whole bunch of stuff in the kiln because we love one. And it all came out. Now I'm going to try and, it came out really dry.
Okay.
And it kind of flakes off. And actually what's underneath reminds me a bit of salt, because I wish I could do salt. Can't.
Yeah.
But of course this just, you can't use that. So obviously I missed something else, and being cheap, I've mixed up a new batch and we're on to using that, but I still have this bucket with a big X on it in my studio. And I somehow want to maybe even try to add something, but I have no idea what it was that I did wrong, what I left out. But I'm just reticent to dump that bucket of bad Rosie's Red out. So
right.
I don't know if you have any suggestions just off the top of your head of what I might have been missing.
So it looks like you're missing some flux. So can you just name off which ingredients are in that glaze?
Of course. Organized. Okay, go to somebody else. I'll come back with the recipe, okay?
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Elsa, did you have another question? I saw you put your hand up. No, okay.
Sorry, I just moved my hands a lot.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
That's just saying stuff like, just need to do stuff.
I'm just looking in the chat here. Joyce says, does anyone out there have suggestions about using a glaze over terra sigillata with mason stains added? I fired a cone 6 and the info I have about is usually on low fire glazes. The Rhonda Willer's book is great, but very few people are using cone 6 clay. Any info is welcome. I've tested my clear glazes over the terracage and it generally has been very cloudy or turns gritty. Thank you. So I don't have experience with terra sigillata except for I made it one time when I was in art school just to try it, and I glazed, or I put it on one pot that was I stuck in a sawdust firing, and that's about it. And it's I burnished it and it's nice and shiny, but I don't know much about, so I didn't fire it to cone 6. It was really low fired. It was a cone 6 clay, but then it just made it to maybe cone 08 or something. So I don't have experience with adding mason stains or with terra sigillata firing to cone 6. So does anyone in here have experience with that? No? Okay, Joyce, I'm sorry that I'm just promoting someone else to panelists. I'm sorry that I can't help you. That would be maybe something that you could, I don't know if you're in my Facebook group. It's called Understanding Glazes with Sue. But that could be something that you could ask in there, and then there will be more people with more experience that can maybe help you. But yeah, that's just not something that I've worked with. So yeah, so I'm sorry that I don't have an answer for you. And then Dora is asking what, Kirti, I'm gonna unmute you again. What is the name of your company again?
Gita Ceramic.
Gita? Like G-I-T-A? Okay.
G-I-T-A.
G-I-T-A. Gita Ceramic.
Ceramic. Also, we are manufacturer and exporting the ceramic wash bowls.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Basins, wash basins and closets.
Okay.
We have a factory near Ahmedabad in India.
Yeah.
And we are exporting also.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Me too.
Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Jody.
Yeah, I have it. Okay. So Rosie's Red is 29.7 flint, 5 EPK, 19.8 Kona soda feldspar, 13.9 talc, and 31.6 Gersley borate. I added the 2% bentonite, and I'm using 15% red iron oxide.
Okay, so you know you added the red iron oxide, right? Because it's, it's
yes,
red.
I did. I'm wondering if I added much. I don't know. I just.
So I would guess it's either the Kona feldspar or the Gersley borate that is missing. But yeah, hard to say which one. But you could.
I'm going to do little tests then. I just had no idea of where to start trying to add some. So I just thought, well, I'm going to put in a bowl so that nothing flows over my kiln shelves. On a test tile, I'll then just add to that, some of each, and just see if it even takes me closer back to it. I'll try not to spend too much time. I mean, really, it's just a glaze, but.
Yeah. So if you know the dry weight of what you started with, then so what I would do, so say you started with 5,000 grams, I would mix the glaze up really, really well. And then maybe divide it equally into 5 buckets by volume. So then you have approximately 1,000 grams of each. And then you can maybe try adding the Kona to one and the Gersley to the other, see how those come out. And then you still have 3,000 grams to, like, based on those results, then you can use that information to go forward with the rest of the glaze.
Right. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. So that's like, if you know the dry weight, then you can kind of easily make little test batches for yourself just by like eyeballing the volume, just dividing it up that way.
Will do. Thanks so much. And I will say I'm in Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario, but I grew up out west, and my parents are in Victoria. So when all this is over and I go back to visit them, I may travel up road and see if I can go to your studio or go to your shop anyway. I've looked it up online. So you may see me show up at your door one day.
Yeah, for sure. Anyone's always welcome to come by where I work, Cedar Hill Rec Center. It's we have a beautiful art center with a gallery. They switch out the gallery every 2 weeks, and so we have a visual arts program as well as a ceramics program. And so I'm just surrounded by art and artists all the time. So it's a really lovely place. Like even if I'm not there, just to check out. And then we have a bulletin board with all like the art happenings around Victoria at the time. And so it would be a good place to come and just see where else you would want to go while you're here.
Well, thank you very much for this. This has been great. It's when you're working in a bit more isolation, this is lovely.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for coming. Lisa, did you have a question?
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks. Thanks for doing this. So yeah, I'm really new to glazing. This is like I've maybe made 4 glazes, and so I have this test batch I made, and as you can see, I believe this is called hard panning.
Yeah.
But even when I mix it with the blender, it's just very hard to get it like dispersed, even with my little hand blender.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure, and I have other ones that have similar recipes, but they're not doing it as much. But this is the recipe.
Okay.
For a 100-gram batch. Can you see that?
Yeah. Darvan. So I'm curious why the Darvan is there. The Darvan could be the reason for the hard panning.
Okay.
So I saw, so your glaze has like 15% EPK, and then how much Gersley borate was in there?
4.48.
Okay, yeah, so it's not a huge amount. So I would guess that the Darvan is why it's hard panning, because Darvan is a deflocculant, and a way to remedy hard panning is to flocculate your glaze. And so my suggestion would be to flocculate it with Epsom salts, a saturated Epsom salt solution. But then I would also suggest maybe not adding the Darvan next time you mix the glaze, because Darvan is something that I would add after mixing a glaze if I felt that it needed it. And so the way I decide that is, so I would mix the glaze, I would bring it to the specific gravity I want. If I don't know what the specific gravity I want it to be, I would aim for around 1.5 grams per milliliter. And then at that point, if the glaze is really thick and sludgy, then I'm going to be adding Darvan to thin it up and get it flowing. And then if at that point the glaze is really thin and watery, then I'm adding Epsom salts to kind of thicken it back up. And so So you could try adding a little bit of Epsom salts to fix the glazes that you have already. Then going forward, I would leave out the Darvan, mix the glaze up, and then decide whether it needs the Darvan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Deborah says, I've had brilliant results with Epsom salts for this problem. So, yes, so have I. Oh, Elsa, yes.
I do have a question from Epsom salts.
Okay.
So I have this glaze, which I use a lot, and it changes a lot on thickness because it hard bends a lot. I was having a really hard time getting bentonite, so I was just kind of like going with it, and I love the results. And I do love the fact that sometimes it's water, it's like clear with like some things, and sometimes it's and sometimes it's really white and milky. But I realized it doesn't. I was trying to like mix two buckets and figure like sometimes it's like thick and it gets like whiter and like milkier, and sometimes it's like really clear because it's really like thin. But I've been like doing some tests and it doesn't really change. Like sometimes I do it like really thin. Like I dip my fingers, I eyeball most of everything. I dip my fingers and they're like, it's really runny and really clear, and it comes out milky and runs a lot. And sometimes it's just thick and really thick. It barely sticks to the bisque pot, and it still comes out clear. So what's it really like? I've been thinking, okay, well, I do need to get the Epsom salts. I'm locked in, so I really can't do it right now. And I've been like filling up a lot of orders. I'm the only one that works in my studio, so it's really busy. So I figured as soon as I have chance, I'll do the Epsom salts that I saw on your website. But I'm concerned of the fact that even sometimes it's thick and it still comes out clear, and sometimes it's thin and it comes out white. So I really don't know what, like, if you have any clue.
Yeah, and are you talking about the exact same glaze recipe?
Exact same glaze recipe. Yeah. I drill mix it. I drill mix it every time I'm gonna dip something in it, and sometimes I add more water to get it more clear, but it doesn't work.
Okay. And so have you started measuring specific gravity of your glazes?
No, because I don't have a densimeter right now, like a measured density thing. And also I finally got it, and it's stuck somewhere else in the city, and I can't get it because I can't leave my house.
Right. Yeah. So what you can do, because all you need is a scale and a container to measure water, like volume, milliliters. So so what you can do is, if you have any sort of container, you can stick the container on your scale, tear it so that it reads 0, and then fill the container with water. So because water, the density of water is 1 gram per milliliter. So every milliliter of water weighs 1 gram. So you can take any container and you can fill it with water. So say you fill it with 300 grams of water. The level at that point is 300 milliliters. So you can mark a line on your container at the 300, where it weighs 300 grams, and then you can write 300 milliliters at that line on the container. And then you can use that container to measure specific gravity of your glazes, so then you mix your glaze really well, you stick your container on your scale, you tear it so that it reads 0, and then you would fill the container up to that line with glaze. And then you have 300 milliliters of glaze. So you take the weight of the glaze in grams, you divide it by 300 milliliters, and then that's your specific gravity. So that's all you need to do to measure specific gravity.
Sure.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have, I do have like a full color guide that you can download that explains all of this, which would be easier. So I'm gonna just, in the chat, I'm gonna just type the link, the URL for you to download that guide. ceramics.com/SG guide. And then, oh, I'm talking just to Deborah. Whoops. Sorry. let me try that again.
Do you suggest to do this like with Epsom salts or bentonite?
So, okay. So first you measure the specific gravity, because all the specific gravity is telling you is how much water is in your glaze and whether your glaze has a high amount of water or a low amount of water. So the higher your specific gravity number, after you divide your grams by your milliliters, that if the number is higher, that means you have less water. And then you add water to bring the number down. So say you measure your specific gravity and it's like 1.7. That's quite high. So then you could add water to bring it down to around 1.5. And if it's a clear glaze, we generally keep our clear glaze between like 1.4 and 1.45. And because we have the same issues where if it's too thick, then it's cloudy. And I also wrote a blog post about this. It's called the clarity, getting clarity with clear glazes. And it just talks about how we use specific gravity to make sure that our clear glazes are always really clear.
It's not clear. It makes a thing. But look, this is the same glaze. It's not clear, but it's clearish. And then this is the other one that doesn't do that. And sometimes it comes out really white and milky like this.
Right.
So, I mean, I do like the streaks, but I make, I mean, I have to fill in order sometimes and they want it like this and it comes out like this and it's a problem.
Yeah, and so do you, like, just by looking at the glaze, do you think that the milky glaze is thicker? Like the glaze layer?
I thought so, but then I did some tests and the thin one came out, but this is the same glaze. Like if you look at this guy's hair, it's the same glaze, and sometimes it's bluish. And this was applied. This one was applied really thick, but then this one is really thick also, and it's almost clear.
Okay. And so when you say thick, do you mean thick in the bucket or thick layer on the pot after it's fired?
Thick in the bucket, but then I mean this one I dipped like 3 times maybe because I didn't want it to have that runny thing. So I can do that. I make all these cups too that have the runny thing. This is just a streak of cobalt underneath that drips in this way. So the thicker one I can get to manage, but sometimes it also comes out clear, even though it's thick and it runs and everything. So I don't know what's the thing that makes this change. Even like the tone, sometimes it's thick, but it's still clear.
Yeah, because it's possible for a glaze to be thick in the bucket, but then give you a very thin application.
Yeah.
And that has to do with flocculation. And so if a glaze is over flocculated, so if you take a thin glaze and you flocculate it, it's gonna get thicker. But it's the ratio of solid particles to water that determines the thickness of the application layer. And the thickness in the bucket, or the viscosity in the bucket, that determines how the glaze applies to the pots. So we have 2 different things that we're kind of dealing with here. So if you measure the specific gravity, if you want this clear glaze to be clear without the white streaks, I would recommend bringing your specific gravity down to 1.4 or 1.45, somewhere between there, just like as a target to start with. And then at that point, like, so you might be like, oh, I shouldn't be adding more water because the glaze is already really thin. So that is when you're going to want to flocculate with Epsom salts. And you said you don't have Epsom salts right now, so Epsom salt is going to help if you dip your pots and you get just like a really thin layer where it barely seems like there's any glaze on there at all. That's because the viscosity of the glaze, like the glaze isn't sticking to the pot, to the bisque very well. And so adding Epsom salts is going to help the glaze particles to stick together to each other and also to stick to the bisque. but your glaze application layer, because you have, because if you bring your specific gravity down to 1.4, you're gonna have quite a lot of water in there. So the amount of solid particles that actually stick to your bisque is gonna be less. So then you're gonna have a thinner glaze application. Even though you've thickened it with Epsom salts, you're like the resulting layer of glaze will be thinner.
Okay.
Just because it's like the ratio of water, you have a high ratio of water to solid particles, and it's the solid particles that become the glaze. The water just evaporates before it goes in the kiln.
And what's the thickest that you recommend to go and the gravity, like in density? Because I will eventually want to have two like more like glazes where I can get the clear one and the white bluish one, because I love both of them. Just want to make sure that they do what they do when I want them to.
Mm-hmm. And so for the clear, I would recommend around 1.4, 1.45, and then for the milky one, I would be up around maybe 1.5, 1.55. But it's hard to guess, and like you can do some, so you can take this particular glaze and you can test it. So you can take it where it is. If it settles, if you let the glaze settle out, so there's a layer of water on top, you could remove some of that water. So then you have a glaze with a minimal amount of water, and you keep the water. So then you measure specific gravity. You would dip a test tile, and then you add a little bit of water in, measure specific gravity, dip another test tile, and you keep adding water and dipping test tiles and marking the specific gravity right on the test tile. And then you then have a range of specific gravities that when they come out of the kiln, you're like, oh, so at 1.4, it's really clear, 1.5, it's milky. Then you can kind of see, and you can have two different buckets of glaze, and one that you keep on the thicker side and one that you keep on the thinner side.
Thank you so much.
That's what I would do.
That's so useful. It's gonna save me so much money. I keep getting like wrong pots with like non-clear or clear glaze where I don't want it to be.
Yeah, for sure. Jody, yes.
Just a quick question. You mentioned when you were speaking with Elsa, your blog, was it your blog post, Getting Clarity?
Getting Clarity with Clear Glazes.
Okay, so is that, do you have a blog? I didn't know that.
I do have a blog, yeah.
Okay.
SueMcLeodCeramics.com/blog, or just SueMcLeodCeramics.com will get you there. Yeah, and I've written tons of articles about all of this stuff.
Okay, that's great. I'm testing out a liner glaze that I want to go forward with, so that will be helpful to have that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, I'm just noticing someone asked a question. Yes, I sent my link just to the panelists and not the attendees. So I'm going to send the link to panelists and attendees this time. First, I just sent it to Deborah, so we're getting there. Okay, so that should be to all panelists and attendees. So this link is to get my specific gravity guide. So you'll have to submit your name and email address, but you guys are already on my email list, so it'll just send you the guide right away. Okay, Karen says, is there a difference between Epsom salts from the drugstore and perhaps one purchased from a ceramics vendor? No, there's no difference at all. And I've even used lavender scented Epsom salts to flocculate a glaze before, and it worked just fine. It has like a bit of an oily film, but it was fine. And okay, Richard says, I need to go, but thank you. And please let me know when you'll be having another Zoom meeting. Yes, I will probably have another one next Friday. And I'll be sending information about that on Tuesday. So yeah, I enjoy this.
You too.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about timing. Like, I think since I'm on the west coast of Canada, if I start early in, 9 a.m. is a good time, because then everyone else seems to be at a later time zone. So that helps the people in the UK and India not be joining in the middle of the night. So I might stick with 9 a.m. as my Pacific time as my time of day. Deborah says, this is so helpful. Thank you so much. You're very welcome, Deborah. Thank you for coming. Does anyone else have a question? Cindy, did you have a question, or are you just hanging out? Let me unmute you. Oh, there we go. Now you can.
You answered it already. I asked about the old glaze chemicals. I have a lot stored in my garage, so your answer was very helpful. I thought it was okay, but good to have it verified.
Yeah, for sure. Good. I'm glad.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And Barry, did you have another question? Just unmuting you here. There, or wait. There.
Okay, so I hope it's a quick question. It's just a little test piece, a thin piece of porcelain.
Yes.
I'd sort of etch the outside, and I'd hope to get a nice thin glaze on the inside, but I don't know if you can see, it's all extremely uneven. It looked very thin and even when I put it on. It was quite a low specific, it was quite thin, thin down the glaze, so I really only wanted to like just kiss the surface. So yeah, is there any resolution for that?
Generally, if you're getting an uneven glaze surface, flocculating your glaze is going to help you get a more even surface. So I'm going to guess that your glaze, because you wanted a thin layer, that your glaze was quite like runny and watery, like really low viscosity.
Correct.
And so if you add just like a little tiny bit of saturated Epsom salt solution to that glaze and mix it really well, like with a high-powered mixer, and you just, so it depends on your bucket size, but if you're using like a small test batch, I would just add a couple drops of Epsom salts. If you have like a bucket about this size, about a teaspoon of Epsom salt solution. And then if you have like big garbage can buckets, then a tablespoon at a time. And then what that does is the glaze particles, it kind of activates them so that they're like magnets and they stick together. And it helps to give a smoother glaze application, and it also helps the glaze to, it takes a longer time to dry when it comes into contact with the bisque. And so what happens is when we dip our bisque in the glaze and then it dries instantly, then you get all these drips that kind of freeze in time. And so that's why all the drips show up. But when you flocculate your glaze with Epsom salts, it just gives it, an extra 30 seconds or so before it completely dries. And so it helps like the layer to just even out and give a nice even layer. It's going to thicken your glaze in the bucket, but it's not going to thicken the glaze application layer.
So can I just ask you, I may have got this the wrong way around. I did actually add Epsom salts, but then I thinned it down with water. So maybe I did the process the wrong way around.
Okay, yeah, possibly. And so, but I always start with a specific gravity measurement because that kind of just gives you a baseline for what you're starting with. Because I was saying last week, it's a calculated value. It's so thin and thick is just kind of interpretation. Like I might think it's thin and you think it's thick, but with specific gravity, it's not up for interpretation. You're dividing grams by milliliters, and so you get a number to start with. And so if you're looking for a thinner application, you might want the specific gravity to be around, less than 1.5, I would say, maybe 1.45, and then just flocculate it, and you just add enough so that you see the glaze kind of thicken, and then you stop because you don't want to over thicken it. So you just add a little bit, mix really well, and when you notice it visibly thicken, then you should be good to go. But yeah, I always deal with the water first, and then based on the way the glaze moves, the viscosity of the glaze in the bucket, after getting the water set, then I decide whether it needs to be flocculated or deflocculated.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for the clarification.
You're welcome. Okay, I have a question. For settling of glaze in bucket, is the problem of grinding also? If it's not properly ground, then settling problem. After adding Epsom salt, viscosity flow measurement is required. Yeah, so the grinding of the, I assume this is Kirti talking. I assume he means like the grinding of the raw powdered materials. So a viscosity flow measurement is required. Yeah, there are tools you can use to measure viscosity. One is called a Zahn cup or a Ford cup, and they're like these little cups with a hole in the bottom that you can dip into your glaze, and then you calculate the time that it takes for the cup to empty. And that's a way of having like a calculated viscosity measurement. But I generally use, I just use visual measurements. So what I like to do is, there's the finger dip test that most of us are aware of, where you dip your finger in and pull it out. If you can like completely see your finger, the glazes all kind of run back off into the bucket and you can see your finger, the skin is exposed, then that is an indication your glaze is too thin. You want a nice coat of glaze. But I also, when I'm stirring the glaze, and then I stop stirring, I watch how long it takes for the glaze to stop moving around the bucket. So if I'm like mixing with a spatula and then I stop, and if the glaze keeps moving around and around and around and around and eventually comes to a stop, that's a fairly low viscosity. And viscosity is resistance to flow. So if you think about the more a glaze, the more easily a glaze can flow, then that is a lower viscosity. So if a glaze has high viscosity, it has a high resistance to flow. So when you stop mixing your glaze, and then if it just stops immediately and it doesn't swirl around the bucket at all, then I would say that that's on the thicker side. And what I'm looking for is I want to stop stirring my glaze and I want it to swirl around once or twice and then kind of come to an abrupt stop. And that's generally how I'm, without using tools, how I'm determining the viscosity of my glaze. But yeah, there are tools that you can buy and use and time how long it takes for the glaze to flow out of the cup. That it's just an extra step. And if you want to get really calculated, which sometimes I like to do, you can try that. But I generally find like the specific gravity measurement is the most important, in my opinion. And then for the rest of it, it's just quicker to eyeball it. And I've just gotten really used to watching how the glaze moves around the bucket. Okay, a question. Do you ball mill your glazes? Have you done any testing with it? Oh, Matthew. Yeah, no, I've never used a ball mill before. So I don't have any experience with that. I have a rock tumbler that I've had for about 20 years that I was considering turning into a ball mill. And, but I don't, we learned a little bit with Matt Katz. He talked a little bit about ball milling glazes, but that's not something that I've ever experimented with. Yeah, but a ball mill, so for those who don't know, it's like a barrel that spins around and you have all these little porcelain bead pellets in there. And what they do is they crush the glaze particles to make them smaller. And you can over mill your glaze so they get smaller and smaller. And the smaller your glaze particles are, generally the less time it takes them to melt. So you can get more, like your melting is going to be more even, but you can over ball mill your glazes as well, which can sometimes lead to crawling, where your glaze particles are all just too small, and that can lead to issues. But again, I don't have the experience with that. Bonnie asks, if the flow stops too fast in the bucket, then what? Oh, then I am deflocculating. So as I said, if the glaze, after measuring specific gravity, if the glaze is too thin, then I flocculate. Well, if at that point, if the glaze is too thick, then I would deflocculate. And I use Darvan as my deflocculant of choice. There's sodium silicate is another deflocculant, and the activating ingredient in Darvan and sodium silicate is sodium. So sodium is a deflocculant. But what I found with sodium silicate is it's really easy to add too much deflocculant, and to the point where it becomes over deflocculated. So as you deflocculate your glaze, it's thinning the glaze down without adding extra water. But then eventually, if you add too much sodium silicate, and I tried to do this with Darvan, and I wasn't able to actually add too much Darvan where it caused a problem. But it was really easy with sodium silicate to over deflocculate. And then what happens is that the glaze starts to thicken back up again. So it gets thinner and thinner, and then it gets really thick and turns into a sludge. And then it's kind of toast. There's no recovering from that. So that's why I use Darvan over sodium silicate, just because like in all the testing that I did, where I tried to push glazes past the reasonable limit and try to get them to fail, because that's like how I like to learn things, is I try to see how far I can take something before it fails. And with the Darvan, it got thin, and then I kept adding more and more, and I got to the point where I was like, this is getting expensive and nothing's happening, so I just stopped. So Darvan is the safer of those two materials.
Sue, what did you say was the element in both sodium silicate and Darvan that is the deflocculant?
Sodium.
Sodium, thank you.
Yeah, so Darvan is sodium polymethacrylate. That's the chemical name for, Darvan 7. So there's different types of Darvan out there, but Darvan 7 is the one that I use, and the one that, like, if I just order Darvan from my supplier, they're giving me Darvan 7. So I think it's the most common one. Is there a difference in Darvan 7? Yeah. So there's I think there's Darvan 811 and Darvan 812. And one of those is ammonia based, but I haven't actually played around with those materials. I just noticing there's some more questions in the Q&A section. So Fiorenzo says, we talk about glazes. What is the most used temperature? I feel like everyone is trying to reduce it because of costs, etc. I'm just getting started and thought about using cone 6, so around 1220 to 1230 centigrades. I want to make tableware. What is your advice? So cone 6 is, I think, probably the most common temperature right now. Everyone used to fire to cone 10, and then I think everyone made the move to cone 6 just to save energy and money. I don't really know why it came down to cone 6, but like kiln elements, for one thing, firing to cone 10, your elements are going to last a lot longer if you're firing to a lower temperature. So yeah, 1220 to 1230 Celsius. I would start with cone 6, and you have to start with the clay body. So you want to get the clay body for the temperature that you're working with, and then you find glazes to match the temperature of your clay body. So you don't want to, if you have cone 10 clay, then you definitely want to be firing to cone 10 because under firing your clay can be problematic, where your clay has is not completely vitrified. So if you're going for cone 6, I would just go all in on cone 6 myself, just because it is cheaper and uses less energy, and your elements will last longer. And then just make sure you're using cone 6 clay. And then, you know, there's a whole lot of cone 6 glazes out there that you can play around with. Kirti says, sodium tripolyphosphate for glazed deflocculant is better than sodium silicate. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of different materials around the world. Like, this is what we have in North America is Darvan 7. I heard of something called Dispex that people, it might have been in Australia, that is like the replacement. And so Darvan, again, is just like a kind of a brand name, but every material that we use has a chemical analysis that is universal. So Darvan is just the name of sodium polymethacrylate, which if you found sodium polymethacrylate in another part of the world, it's going to be the same thing because it's just based on that chemical analysis. So sodium tripolyphosphate, STPP, yeah, that makes sense that that would be a glazed deflocculant because it contains sodium. That's okay. Cindy says, thank you. You're very welcome. Oh, it's 11 o'clock. Yeah, so I'm actually going to wrap this up. Is there another, let's see if there's any last minute questions. Oh yeah, so people are just heading out. Clay question. I see clays that are labeled cone 6 to 10. I don't understand how this affects the clay. So this question is from Dora. Yeah, I honestly, if I found a clay that was labeled for a range of temperatures, I would be firing it to the highest temperature because like basically you want to fire your clay so that it's completely vitrified unless you're working in earthenware. So vitrified means, you know, when we bisque fire, our clay becomes very porous, meaning there's a network of little holes going through the clay body. And then as we fire the clay hotter, the silica in the clay starts melting and the liquid silica starts to fill all those pores. And our goal is to have a clay body that is as close to being completely 100% vitrified as possible. And so if you have a clay body that says it's good from cone 6 to cone 10, I would be firing that clay body to cone 10 because at cone 6, the clay body is going to be more absorbent. And when you have dishes, especially if you're making tableware, if you have dishes that are absorbing water, so they come out of the dishwasher and there's water actually physically inside the clay. And then say you stick that piece in the microwave. Well, if there's water within your clay body and then that water turns to steam, then your clay body is going to explode. Because water turns to steam really fast and it creates a lot of pressure. And so you want your clay body to be completely vitrified, especially for tableware and things that are going to be washed and exposed to water. If you're making decorations, you know, sculptures, you know, things that go on the wall, things that aren't going to be used for food and aren't going to have to be washed, then it doesn't really matter if your clay body is vitrified. But for tableware, functional pottery that people are going to be eating from and washing, then your goal should be to fire to a high enough temperature that your clay body is vitrified. So I would maybe ask the clay company, like, I don't know, kind of call them out and say, how can a clay be vitrified at cone 6 and then not be overfired at cone 10? Because once a clay body is completely vitrified, if the temperature keeps going up, that's when you get bloating, where you get pockets, bubbles within the clay body itself. And then your pieces are are ruined. So yeah, that's something that I would, you know, if you felt so inclined, confront the clay company about to see what their answer is. And if you do, let me know because I'm curious. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys go now. It's 11 o'clock in the morning here, so we've been on here for 2 hours, and I can feel my voice is getting kind of dry. So I'm going to invite you guys to another one of these for next Friday. So I hope you'll join me if you're around, and I hope you all have a really good week, and just taking things day by day as we can, dealing, you know, it's kind of crazy that the whole world is going through something together. So, I mean, that's kind of the comforting thing about it, I think, that, you know, my world isn't going crazy and you guys are all normal. Like, we're all just like trying to deal with this together. So I really enjoy meeting with you guys face to face and just talking about ceramics and kind of shutting out the rest of the world and what's going on. So thank you again for coming. And I hope to see some of you next week. And yeah, please join my Facebook group, Understanding Glazes with Sue, if you're not in there yet, and then post anytime, and I go in there several times a day and answer questions. And it's sometimes easier when we can share photos and glaze recipes, and I can have some time to kind of analyze things and see what I think. So that's it. Thank you all, and hope to see you again next week. Okay, bye.